So one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you was, to assess this inbound marketing conundrum that we're in. And what I mean by that is digital advertising is getting more expensive and less effective because of privacy laws. And we just saw in the news, I think today, Department of Justice is now slapping Google's hand once again for their monopoly on the digital advertising market. What does this have to do with revenue teams? Probably asking folks, but it's everything because so many companies rely on this inbound marketing program and try to achieve that level of repeatability around their inbound marketing. And you're a seasoned marketer, marketing consultant, former head of marketing. I really want to get your perspective on, are inbound models in trouble with digital advertising and all its issues that are happening?
So that is a big question to unpack. I think
Right.
there's a lot of layers there. And
I'm
I
known
want
for that. I'm good at
to
that.
you are, which
I
is
load
which
the
is why I
question.
love you, Derek. So I want to take it back a little
Okay.
bit
Mhm.
to a documentary that I watched. It was on Netflix a few years ago, and it was based on the Freakonomics book
Yeah.
by it's Malcolm Gladwell. I hope. I
Mhm.
hope I'm getting that right. We'll correct it
We'll
in
fact check.
post-production if not.
Yeah.
But my and I could be confusing this with another like internet documentary, but they're basically at some point in time it was decided that the internet was going to be free. And in order for the internet to be free, that means that there has to be some type of exchange in a capitalist world. And right, wrong, or indifferent, that is the world that we find ourselves in.
Right.
And so if you're going to access all of this information on the internet, the exchange is you are the product, right? You are
Mhm.
the eyeballs that other companies are trying to get in front of. And
Compete
so
for.
they're
Mhm.
paying for the internet that we get to enjoy for free. And so if we want to enjoy all that Google has to offer, we have to exchange our eyeballs for it. And so I don't
I
see
love
that
that.
going away
Mhm.
anytime soon. I think that model is pretty entrenched. Do I think it could transform and change in the future? Of course.
Okay.
And I mean, there are plenty of people who, um, choose to use different search engines because they don't want to be tracked. They don't want, and it definitely is a conundrum for marketers. But I think there will always be that tension, right?
Mhm.
People want something of value, but
Right.
what are they going to exchange to get that thing of
And
value?
I think it's happening subconsciously. You make a valid point. I go on to Instagram and LinkedIn and these applications. I go to Google and anytime I don't know something, I just looked up the author of the book you just brought up, and
Right,
all this is free information that I'm able
right.
to at my fingertips, and it's making this all better. So you're saying the trade-off with that is, folks might know who you are, they might have access to a little bit of your information, and they're going to try and compete for your attention.
And I may need to correct myself here. It may be The Social Dilemma, which was a documentary that came out a couple of years ago. Another great one about the internet and about privacy, and it may be that one that talks about that. So
Yeah,
we'll
we'll
fact
fact
check
check
this.
it.
But
Exactly. The
regardless,
point is
we are
valid.
the product. Our
Exactly.
eyeballs
Exactly.
are the thing we give in exchange for using the internet for free.
Okay.
And so we as consumers have to decide, are we willing to pay for not being advertised to? So an example of that would be Spotify, right? If you want to listen to all the music without ad interruption, you can do that.
For
And you
nine
pay
ninety
for
nine a month, because that's what I pay.
exactly. Exactly. And then
Mhm.
they'll keep raising that eventually. And Disney Plus is doing the same thing,
Right.
right? If you want the ad-free experience, you have to pay a little bit more for premium now than you did before. And we as the consumers have to decide how much we value our privacy. I know this is going a little
No,
funny,
this is what we're
but
talking.
it
It's
factors
foundational.
into
Mhm.
whether inbound is dead. All right, so that's one layer of it. The second layer is that when people right now want to feel self-empowered to make their own decisions when they're buying something. We're talking about sales. So if I'm going to investigate, let's say I need software to help me create marketing images and I don't have Adobe skills, Illustrator skills, Photoshop, whatever. I need something simple and easy. What am I going to do the first thing? Well, I might ask people I know,
Right.
right? That's one thing I might do, but invariably I'm going to go to Google. How many times do you think you run a Google search every day? I mean, we could sit there and count, but like literally a question pops in your head
Right.
and you're like, let me check on Google, right? That's what
It's
we
like
do.
turning on a
Like
light switch. It's automatic. You don't even think
exactly.
about it.
We don't check the sources or dictionaries or encyclopedias anymore like we had to when we were kids, right? We can just look it up
Yeah,
on Google.
yes, I used an encyclopedia as a child.
Way back when,
Didn't
right?
have Google. Yeah.
So I think that and I completely blanked, I'm sorry. The fact that we that's how we get our information means that inbound is always going to be something. And inbound is not just paid advertising. Inbound is
Right, right,
also
right.
search engine optimization. So when you think
Which
about
is still Google and still,
which is still Google,
yeah,
it
yeah,
is,
still part of the
right?
inbound
Of course,
model. Okay.
there is another search engine, Bing, which does still exist and does still, bring in a few billion or whatever for Microsoft. But yeah. And then there's this actually the second largest search engine after Google, which is also owned by Google, and that's YouTube.
Oh, true.
I
Yeah,
not
yeah,
everybody knows that, but
yeah,
YouTube is the second
absolutely.
most searched search engine in the world.
Make sure
So
you like and subscribe to this YouTube channel.
yes, exactly. I will do that right after this if I haven't already. So that's the second layer there.
Okay.
So I think as long as people want to do their own searching, and I don't see that going
Yeah, the
away.
buyer journey is still
Yeah,
heavily weighted towards doing your own due diligence. The transition of salespeople being the gateway to information that changed 20 years ago or whatever it was with the .com era. And so now all 80% of the buying decision is made before they talk to a salesperson.
exactly.
So
And
that
that's
that model
different
is not
than
going away, even in B2B is your point.
yeah, and that's different than even 10 years ago. Like 10, 12 years ago, when I was first cutting my teeth in product marketing, um the consumer was not empowered to buy business software. And we're talking B2B, right? That's the world I live in.
Right. Me too.
And that's primarily the world you live and play in. So at that time IT departments really kind of were controlling software purchases. That's really dramatically changed.
Right.
And so
Bring
I
your own
think
device, bring your own whatever,
exactly.
entered the market.
Exactly. So I think that, using search engines to find information, that's not going away.
Okay.
Do I think it's going to transform and
And
evolve?
programmatic advertising and hitting people,
Yeah.
either on websites and that, so that in, but with the cost exponentially increasing, and it's not going to get
Okay.
easier to
Yes.
target people, right? The privacy laws are going to get, they appear to be, we saw what Apple went through and so forth. It's getting harder to target those eyeballs specifically,
It is.
right? And it's not getting cheaper to do that. So do you see that? Okay, so it's never going away, but is it going to force us to explore other channels and find ways to bypass it? Or is it just going to be, hey, you need to start allocating more and more budget to this channel and taking it seriously and understanding its effectiveness? I'm trying to understand, we're not in trouble because we know the behavior's there, but if I'm a startup organization and I'm trying to reach my 10 million marker, and I only have so much marketing budget, um, is it worth throwing out the tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of dollars that it
Right.
costs to run these digital advertising campaigns? Or do I just put that money back into events now because we're all coming back into in person?
Yeah. So I think it is going to depend on a few factors. Who is your buyer? How saturated is your target market? I mean,
Fair.
if you're in a market where there's a lot of competition and therefore the keywords are driven, the price of the keywords is driven up significantly, you're going to have to determine what kind of budget threshold you can tolerate. And you're going to have to acknowledge that that means you're not going to get as large a share of the eyeballs as you
Mm.
want. And so my
Adjust your
recommend
expectations.
Exactly. And I've been in that world for a long time.
Right.
I have spent the vast majority of my career in early stage startups that didn't have, the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend on Google advertising. And so you have to get in front of your prospects in other ways. I would never recommend anybody to throw all their eggs in any one basket
Fair.
in marketing. I always encourage to have a diversified approach to marketing, of which I think paid search has to be one component. And so you have to, take a look at
Pay
the
to play.
landscape.
Mhm.
Exactly, exactly. You are going to have to pay to play. You have to spend money to make money. What why it's complex is that there are a lot of different levers that you can pull in order to grow your business, and you have to determine, okay, where are my where's my target market spending their time? So are they is this a fairly well established area, and
Mm.
they're doing a lot of Google searching? Are there like specific keywords that are well defined already? And you can, there's free tools out there. Google's keyword tool, you can go and determine, okay, what's the volume of search around
What's
this
the cost per
keyword,
click?
right?
Mhm.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
the other thing you can do, so I'll take my last employer as an example. So we were in contract management. Contract management as a keyword is a super, super expensive keyword, right? It's a lot of players in the field, but somebody searching for contract management may not even be my target buyer. It could be a law student, right, who's searching around contract management. It could be anybody, but somebody searching, best contract management software 2023 is
Contextualized
probably looking for a short list of great
vendors.
exactly.
Mhm.
So really honing in on those long tail keywords is going to be a way to help you maximize your budget. You don't want to waste budget on keywords that are too broad and are going to kind of throw you lots of stuff. If you only have a limited budget, you're going to want to get super targeted. So it may be a smaller volume of searches around a long tail keyword, but they're much, much more
Yeah,
qualified
very
prospects.
specific.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. They're more likely to be in your lane. You
exactly.
mentioned YouTube earlier, and you mentioned the fact that it's free for us to consume information. It's also free for us to advertise all over social media and through a search platform, specifically like YouTube. Right. I mean, of course, there's paid models, but my point is, you can post videos that are inside of a search engine as opposed to
Yes.
a social media platform, and so we don't need to get into the differences there necessarily, but do you think B2B companies, particularly in tech, we both worked in and specialized in software companies most recently, do you think they're missing an opportunity? Because I don't see a ton of YouTube action from startup organizations that are in tech space. They're doing their best on LinkedIn, which is great, but we know that's not the only player in town.
Yeah.
Are we not doing enough on YouTube and using that as a way to fuel the SEO channel?
I don't think B2B is doing enough. I think younger, kind of more hip with it, software companies know that, and they're doing pretty well in that area. But I think some of the larger, like, it's an older model, and there's work to be done. The reality is that the human brain engages with images. It processes images 60,000 times faster than text.
Wow.
And when you add movement to that, the retention is so much greater. So video is here to stay. What format that comes in, I think we're still kind of figuring it out, right? Because I mean, YouTube's been around for a while now.
Right,
I
right.
mean, 15, almost 18, 20 years, something like that. I mean, I remember making YouTube videos back in like 2006. So
Oh
that's
snap! I gotta go
a
find
minute
those.
ago. Yeah. There might be some Office fan videos out there, like, just saying.
Cool.
But so I think at that time our attention span was very different than it is today. And now if you don't have a TikTok video that's less than 30 seconds, forget it. We're going on to the next thing. So
Mm.
I think we're still sort of figuring out, what video looks like. What I encourage companies to do is have videos of all different lengths. You're going to want, longer sort of demo style
Right.
feature function type videos. I've done customer testimonial videos where I have like a 2-minute version, the 60-second version, the 15-second like reel kind or yeah, Instagram reel style kind of video.
Right.
And I think there's a place for all of it. So when you're building out a video strategy, you need to be thinking through, okay, what am I talking about? Does it lend itself towards one particular length versus another? And people like to be touched in different ways.
Right.
Some
Right.
people will, they're podcast people, right? They want to hear the content. They want to have it playing in the backgrounds constantly while they're doing whatever on their laptop. So I would get back at, it's kind of like with investment. You got to diversify. You got it. People are all different. So you need to make sure you're providing content and videos that are all different types.
Yeah, you had a podcast at the company that you were at
Yeah.
last.
I've done a lot of podcasting actually. I have my own personal podcast which focuses on racial issues, and then I did a podcast for my former employer about contract management,
Right.
and yeah, I've actually I really enjoy this format, and I like adding video to it because you basically you're doing exactly what you should. You're taking the audio medium, you're going to make this available on podcast platforms, but then you're going to also probably turn this into a long
Repurpose, get some
video.
mileage out of it. Yeah.
Yep, you can do little snippets, right? If they're
You
little
got it.
clips, like this stuff is endless.
Right, right. It is endless, and it can take an endless amount of your time if you're not careful.
True.
Because it can be fun. I'm not gonna lie, geek out on it a lot in some
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
Let's change gears a little bit. I appreciate
Yeah.
your insights on whether or not inbound models are in trouble with all the digital advertising stuff. In terms of working with sales organizations, as someone who's led a successful startup most recently in that contract management cycle space that we were talking about, I worked with you in that engagement.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
hired me as a consultant. That's kind of how we, came to be here. And one of the things that I took away from that engagement was the tremendous amount of collaboration, teamwork, synergy, alignment, dare I use the word, that you had with the sales organization, and particularly the head of sales there. And
Mhm.
you two ran together, running revenue for about 4 years, if I'm
Yeah.
correct, there at that company. So what does it take to shape that level of alignment with the sales organization? We all know there's a lot of tension that happens a lot of times, misalignments, different goals. There's a lot of issues that surround this, a lot of philosophy, but you've done it successfully. What did it take for you to shape a good alignment with your sales organization?
So it took a lot of different things and it took time. So first of all,
Fair.
don't expect it to happen overnight. I think that's unrealistic.
Okay.
It required setting aside baggage from the past, which can be very difficult. And you can only control yourself. You cannot control the other person. So not only
Are
do
we
you
talking
have
about a
to
marriage here? Or are we? No, but no,
I mean,
really,
it's
that's
kind of
what.
like
Yeah.
it in a
Right.
way.
Right.
It requires like, so I would say all the things that are required in any good relationship, whether it's a marriage, a friendship,
Good point.
parents and kids, whatever, um, they're really kind of similar things,
Right.
right? So it's setting ego aside, it's listening to understand, not respond. It's a lot of things that are just like good communication principles. Um, I think first of all, so I'll take the example of my most recent um, sales marketing connection because I think that was an example of really working through some of the hard stuff early,
Perfect.
and there were hiccups and frustrations in the beginning, and I think for me, and again I can only speak for myself, um, not being physically in person made that harder.
Of course,
So
I
I
bet.
do think it is harder to forge relationships, deep connections when it's just over screen. You can do it. I think we're getting better at it because we're getting more practice with it, but
It's very
there is
intentional. You have to be very intentional about it.
you
I mean, before we
do.
jumped on here, we had a little, game planning before we hit record, and we were talking about the pool in the backyard that you got going and
Yeah,
whatnot. But
right.
you have to be very mindful, intentional to do that. It doesn't happen around the water cooler, as they say, any longer, right?
Yeah, it's caring personally.
Mm,
And that is another great book. I'm a big reader, so I'll throw out some other books here.
good,
So
please.
Radical Candor
Yeah, I have that around here
is a
somewhere.
fantastic book, especially for people such as myself. And I'm gonna say, Derek, maybe for you too, because I know you can be very
Radical in my candor.
straightforward, right? But
Yeah,
but
I do.
radical candor works when you care personally, right?
Yeah,
So leading with empathy, leading with your heart, like genuinely caring for a person and letting them know that you can say hard things to someone when they know that you care about them. And so I think that's where there's just a lot of distrust that exists between marketing and sales. Um,
so what steps
marketing,
did you take when you think about
yeah.
being patient? It doesn't happen overnight,
Yeah.
and establishing that level of personal connection with your counterpart. What what steps, if I'm taking notes right now, what were the first two or three things that I would do in that regard?
Meet every day.
Okay.
And maybe that's 10 minutes or 15 minutes, but I
Right.
would have a face-to-face call I'd suggest in the morning. If you
Morning
can fit that
stand-ups,
in.
and
Yeah,
yeah,
a
yeah.
morning stand
Coffee
up,
together, whatever
exactly.
you want to call
Yep.
it. Yeah.
A little huddle. And you can just what are the pressing issues of the day? Anything, it just gives you that opportunity to interact, bounce ideas around, complain about something that's going on if you need
Right.
to
Right.
vent. And that's how you build relationship time, like spending time together.
Love that.
I also recommend that you have shared metrics. You should be
Talk about
measured
that.
on the same things.
Well, we know
Um,
that's like always the tension point, right? How many MQLs did we get? Well, how many deals did we close? And
right.
the comp isn't aligned, the KPIs aren't aligned. It's a constant struggle to get that right. How
So you
did you
have to
do that?
share those metrics. Well, you have to clearly define
Hmm,
those all of those different categories, right? You have to have a very clear and mutually agreed upon definition of an MQL, of an SQL, of an opportunity. Customers are easier, right? Because they've signed a contract. But
right.
the others, you need to have clear definitions. You have to have clear definitions around where the handoff is and how that exactly happens. This is like very in the weeds stuff that
Right.
isn't fun. It's very it's not
Tedious.
it's tedious, and neither
Mhm.
marketing nor sales really wants to do it, but you have to, right? It's like you can't build like this beautiful house and then have a really crappy foundation. Like the beautiful house will crumble, right, eventually. And so
The
you have
wiring
to,
doesn't work.
yeah,
That you can, it looks good, but you turn the faucet on and nothing but brown water comes
yeah,
out.
you
And
don't
it
want
just,
that.
yeah.
Exactly. So you have to mutually agree
Mm,
and you have to mutually own. Um, and I would say another way to do that is to mutually present to the board. So one of the things that I did with my counterpart was when when we would do our quarterly board presentation, sales and marketing always presented together. And so I would have met with my counterpart prior. We would have put our slides together. We would have met to kind of talk, okay, who's talking about what, when, where. We'd have the notes. So all of that, that's buy-in. That's mutual buy-in
right.
to what's happening. So I think those are a few really good examples. I also think, depending on, whether you're in the same office or you're remote, I do think having sort of periodic offsites or, the opportunity to physically get together and just focus on sales and marketing content, strategy, tactics, I think that also really helps.
Well, let's talk about team building a little bit. I appreciate the point on alignment with sales.
Yep.
When I worked with you as well, one of the things that really stood out to me was the marketing organization and then synergistic aspects that you had just within your team, that microculture that you had sort of formed with you in your group. How did you do that? People loved working for you. It was a regular, what I would call a happy environment, and being in those meetings with you and seeing your leadership style, you could see that folks were learning from you and so forth. But how much of that is conscious? How much of that is just who you are? Talk to me about how you formed such a good culture with your organization?
So I took the examples of previous bosses that I had
Hmm.
had, and I learned from that both what to do as well as what not to do. In fact, I think the what not to do in some cases is like that's a really powerful teacher. I've been
Yeah.
super fortunate in the past to have a couple of amazing female bosses, and I'm making that differentiation very intentionally because as a woman, I'm in a challenging position in leadership, straddling this line of, um, wanting to be effective in my leadership, but, fighting a lot of stereotypes and microaggressions that, I faced for the entire 20 years that I've been in business.
Right.
So I'm always looking to people like myself to learn from them. I think you have to, this is the thing about representation. If you don't see it, it's harder. It's yet another obstacle to becoming it. If you're literally the first one. So having that representation, those female leaders where I could observe how they were balancing the need to be direct without being unlikable, which is one of the biggest challenges that women face. The higher
Minorities in
they
general.
climb.
I can relate.
True.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you are direct, you are viewed as, you're called names, you're viewed as unlike. I mean, literally studies have been done about how, especially I know this is true, the studies about women, that the higher they climb in their career, their likability factor declines. It's sort of like inversely correlated, where that is not true for men. The higher a man climbs, the higher his likability factor um, goes. So these are tough things. So watching women who were amazing bosses like that's been awesome. I think also just generally, applying like what are things that people don't like
Hmm.
being micromanaged,
Right.
being limited, being, so I one of the things I really tried to focus on with my team was empowerment, empowering them. I believe that you should surround yourself with people who are better at certain things than you. Hire to your weakness, right? So when I may not be, the most creative copywriter in the world. So hire somebody who is an amazing creative copywriter. Or I may not understand all the nuances of social media best. So hire somebody who lives and breathes social media all day. Like there's nothing wrong with acknowledging where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. And I would say surround yourself with people who are really good and then praise them. Everybody loves to be praised and it's free. It doesn't cost anything, right? Like to say like you're doing a great job or thanking someone. I think that is often missed in business. It's such an
Absolutely.
opportunity to like acknowledge someone's humanity and their expertise, and it builds people up. Like who doesn't like a good compliment? Um, so yeah, I think it's giving people freedom, empowerment, appreciation, listening to them.
Right.
And I also
Acknowledge.
think that just because you're good in your job, like you could be a great marketer and a terrible manager.
Right.
Um,
Same thing. Sales. We know that for a fact.
yeah. And so
Right.
I think that I think if I think it's really important for people to self-reflect. And unfortunately, another tidbit from Radical Candor, unfortunately, the way business has been set up, um, especially in America, is that if you want to grow in your career, you have to manage people. And that's very unfortunate because there should be a path for growing in your career if you're not a manager of people. You could be
Hmm.
like, the absolute expert, but maybe you're not the right person to manage a team. So I really think we need to have a way that people
That's
can
interesting.
climb the ladder without having to, have a bunch of direct reports.
Well, how do you balance the things that you mentioned earlier about acknowledging people, giving praise, not micromanaging? How do you balance these things with accountability, though? Not everybody
Yeah.
is doing a good job all the time.
So when people are struggling, the approach I like to take is asking questions
Hmm.
and kind of like helping them to pull out, like pulling the information. It's kind of like that didactic approach, right? Where you're asking questions, you're getting the person to self-reflect.
Right.
And so like, as an example, if you're seeing that, I don't know, we'll take SDRs because that's what you and I worked on together,
Right.
right? So
Right.
if an
Right.
SDR is consistently not hitting their call number or their email number, and we're seeing this over time, having a conversation like, hey, I'm noticing this, that the numbers, you're kind of like typically falling, 10% short pretty consistently. Can you help me understand what things are getting in the way so that you're not able to reach that number? So don't assume something negative off the bat. Maybe there's something you don't know about. Maybe there's something that you could help. Maybe you need to take something off their plate, or ease things up by providing some additional resources or whatever it is. Give them an opportunity to reflect and explain. Maybe you don't have the information that you need. Now, I've been in situations with employees where, things have gone south and, they've had to be terminated. That sucks.
Yeah.
It's never fun. Um, but I think in general, most people, are trying to do their best. And sometimes it's just not a good fit. And so I think at that point, like, again, remember the humanity. I think you need to try to believe the best and treat those people with the dignity and respect that they deserve. Um, yeah, I
That's a
think
big
that's
topic right now with a lot of layoffs happening, right? Tech sales is imploding, exploding, whatever reference you want to
yes,
use. But we're
yeah,
seeing every day the headlines of more and more tech companies cutting tens of thousands of their employees, which is impacting revenue organizations, both sales, marketing, and all other areas,
yeah.
right? So what's your take on that headline in terms of executives making these massive layoffs and coming under the scrutiny of not doing it in the most humane method?
So I think that a lot of these companies are, taking a very like cover your ass kind of approach. Are we allowed to swear? I don't know. Okay.
Yes, we can say
Okay. We can
ass.
say, okay. They take very much a cover your ass approach. And so it's like, at 3 I think it was Spotify or Alphabet or something. I was reading one of the recent layoffs, 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Everybody gets disconnected from email and before they've even been told. And there's no humanity in that, right? I mean, this is people's livelihood. And when you touch a person's livelihood, they're gonna get upset.
Yeah.
People are living paycheck to paycheck. That's the reality of the world we live in. And they get scared, and there's just no humanity in, just cutting off access to systems before you've even had conversations. um Again, it's assuming the worst about your employees, assuming they're going to go in and listen, I get it. You have to protect yourself, but there has got to be a balance between treating your employees like they're robots and, letting them have carte blanche into every system in your company. I believe there's something in the middle that, we can work on. And I just think, corporate America has a very long way to go before we figure that out. Um, in many ways, people are products in a capitalist
Well, that's
society.
where I was going to ask you is, we literally refer to employees as resources,
Yes.
right?
Should
I mean,
we? I
that
mean, that's kind of gross. Like, right? I don't know. I don't even like, I don't know. I mean, I some of it may be just industry terms, but like I always referred to the people that worked under me as, people on my team or
right.
teammates, team
Exactly.
members, right?
Exactly. Right.
Because that's how I viewed it, right? They're not my employees, they're not my staff, they're not my underlings. Like that, these are humans, these are people. And I don't know, it's just corporate America is a long way to go, I think, in a lot of soul searching. And
Right.
I mean, maybe I think a lot of the layoffs we're seeing, this is a correction from during
Right.
COVID.
Over
So
hiring and
it's not entirely surprising. This
but
was
it's the
going
way
to
that we're going
happen.
about it. I think that's
Okay.
the thing is like there's a balanced perspective. We have to acknowledge that, what some of us were hired at the time that we were hired and what that
Yeah.
represents. Businesses they do this. They do their best. You enjoyed the benefits. You got the training, you got some experience, you built your network more. So the years that you spent at that organization prior to being laid off, there's a lot of value that you were able to take away. Now, if at the end they sent you a Slack message to say that your time here is no longer required, yeah, that's not humane whatsoever. And there's
No,
definitely a better way of delivering that news. The thing is that from a balanced perspective, it's not just, woe is the employee. Businesses have an obligation. I mean, we are, if that's the if this is maybe teetering on other viewpoints, but you work in a capitalist society, you work for a for-profit organization. We're either in the red or we're in the black. It's very binary. And
it is.
but at the same time, we want to, do our best to realize that at the center of all of this is people that making this whole thing go around. So,
It
those
is.
human resources that were, they're not robots. You're right. So we have to, both on the capitalist side, realize that we're not managing robots, but on the employee side of things, we also have to realize that this is a for-profit. So there's this balanced approach. I would hope. Maybe it's not this or that. It's more of an
Yeah.
and.
But I think we also have to do some soul searching around things like, when CEOs are getting multi-million-dollar bonuses while the underlings, are being
Losing
let
everything.
go.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So
Well, who do we see that?
that's
Was
uncomfortable.
it a Google? The Bruce Springsteen concert? They dropped some like $1 million for a private executive thing, and
Yeah.
meanwhile they had just cut off a bunch of people. But
Yeah. The optics are terrible. That's going to have to be fixed. But some of that I think is sort of generational. It's the legacy of a way of doing business from, way back when.
right,
And I'm hopeful. My kids are all Gen Z or whatever they're calling them
I can't
now.
keep
And
track of what the
yeah,
generations are
I
these
know. And I'm
days.
just hoping that, like, I li- this is totally like, it's related, but it's a little off track. So last night, so I have a big blended family, and my 9-year-old stepdaughter was sitting next to me at dinner for, we were going out for my birthday, and she was coloring. We were just chit chatting. She's very chatty. And she goes, Mommy, I just wanted to tell you, I was talking with Genevieve, who is my 13-year-old daughter, and she was telling me that the dress codes that schools have are very sexist because they're mostly aimed at girls. And here she is at 9, like, and she's
Having
thinking like,
that,
I didn't
yeah,
bring it up. And I was like, you're right. You're right, Violet. Like, I was like, she goes, and it's true because I see the girls getting in trouble for dress code stuff at school, but I don't see that happening to the boys. She's already thinking about it at 9. So we're making progress. We are
right.
definitely making progress, but it's going to take time.
What does it mean to you to have a diversity within a revenue organization? That's something where we have Black History Month in February. So depending
Yeah.
on when this gets dropped, there's that component, the racial diversity. There's seeing more women, the lean in movement that we saw. I have 3 daughters myself, so I'm a big proponent there. Being a
Mhm.
minority and identifying as a minority as well, so kind of double layered there. It's important to me. How it's obviously important to you, but how do we, how have you, or how would you recommend to a revenue leader to grapple or deal with this issue in their organization?
You have to start with yourself.
Uh,
Right? You have to take a long, hard look at yourself. Who are the people you hang out with? Right?
mm.
Do you only associate with people that look exactly like you? Like, do you have friends that have different backgrounds, or are you kind of living in a little bubble?
And so
And
you're saying that that personal dynamic will transcend into your business life, kind of like we were talking earlier about consumer behaviors and the marketing to consumers and how we're all consumers, but then that behavior transcends into the B2B world.
it
You're
does.
saying as well on having a diverse team, if you're not keeping a diverse sort of peer group around you, or however you want to, in your personal life, then it's probably going to be a struggle to have diverse teams within the business. I think that's,
Yeah.
a fair topic to debate.
Yeah. And there are a lot of different arguments around why diversity is
Yeah.
important in business. I get a little uncomfortable with some of them because, there's the argument that diverse teams perform, companies with more diverse teams, perform better, right? They have higher revenue, their stock prices are higher, whatever. But again, that commoditizes individuals. And so I just, it feels icky. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah,
But in,
and being the token black man in or the
has that
token
ever happened to you, Derek?
never,
Never.
the token woman leader,
The only
like
woman at the table. Yeah.
right. So there's that level in the issue, I'm sure as well, and it's not a fair world that we live in.
It's
And
not.
it's not an
It's not.
equal world that we live in. So we'll always deal with the challenge, I think, to a certain degree of how we can leverage diversity as a vehicle to drive more success and not kind of keep ourselves in a bubble. And the thing that it comes back to culture in organizations
Does.
a lot of
It
times,
does.
right? And when we talk about culture and we talk about diversity, um, it seems like they are very closely connected. But then I question, if we go too far, are we holding ourselves captive to that culture, right? You think about we want to have this super diverse organization, so we're going to look at different educational backgrounds, we're going to look at different racial groups, but then it gets into equal employment opportunities and all this stuff. It's like a really dicey topic to get into, and it's tough, right? I mean,
Yeah.
uh,
Well, it's easy to find people that look like you because in general, um, the human tendency is to hang out with people like
right,
yourself, right?
right,
So I think if you want a diverse team, and the reason I love diverse teams has nothing to do with like increasing revenue or anything like that. I love diverse teams because I believe that there's a wealth of creativity
the
that comes.
neurodiversity that comes with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I am a huge like I cannot stand groupthink, right? I'm a big person for like debate and an exchange of differing ideas. And while I may hold my opinions very strongly, I have infinite respect for someone who is willing to, debate me from the other side. In fact, I have an episode of my podcast, The Heart of the Matter in Black and White, where, my co-host and I interviewed a guy named, I think it's Chad Jackson is his name. And he is a conservative Black man. And he was in a documentary called Uncle Tom. And
Mm,
we interviewed him on the podcast. And I loved that exchange because my political views may be like entirely different, but we were able to have this really amazing dialogue that was super respectful and like where we listened to it. We didn't have to agree. I
right.
think that's what's missing right now in this free exchange of ideas is just respect and holding space for people with different viewpoints, not just screaming at one another. Like
Right.
it's okay to disagree, but can we treat one another with humanity and dignity?
Yeah. It's a difficult topic to unpack, and it's easier to unpack it when you don't have the confines of being within a corporate setting,
Yeah.
right? Because when you try to talk about this with human resources within your business, or you try to talk about it with your peers or
Yeah.
your employees, it's like a do not touch. Anything that's a protected class, you just don't talk about, you don't
And
reference. And
that's what I think perpetuates the problems. So racism, sexism, all these things, they live in secret, right? And so I think that's one of the things that really I've been really wrestling with over the past few years myself is like it's okay to talk about really uncomfortable stuff like what is it like to be a Black man or a Black woman? What is it like to be a white woman in business? What is it like?
right,
We can have if someone is willing to have that conversation, like it's not like a secret, like shh, don't talk
right. I
about
mean,
it,
like you can see
right?
it. It's like
Right. Like
yeah,
we're
it's the
people.
elephant in the room,
Yeah. So
yeah.
like why can't we talk about it? Right.
Mm,
I just think that secrecy breeds like problems, and kind of just hushing, that's just a veneer of everything's okay.
right.
I don't think that serves anyone.
Well, I like what you said earlier about caring and sort of giving a shit about the person,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
how you built a relationship with your counterpart in marketing. And you have to care enough to have this issue with have this conversation with people, right? I mean, in my career coming up, I often was, the only one who looked like me. And it was never anything that was ever discussed with any manager I ever had. I mean, I've had some great managers. I'm not going to discount them whatsoever, but you never really have a conversation about how are you feeling and how are you settling in okay? And you kind of dance around it in most cases. And I think maybe that perpetuates why we stick with those that are like us, because it's an uncomfortable topic for some of us. Some of
And
us, like
we're
myself,
not taught how to do it. Like,
exactly at all.
so I'll give you an example. When George Floyd was murdered in 2020, so my co-host on the podcast, Essence Revels, dear friend of mine, I worked with her previously, and we've just like one of my best friends, right? And when George Floyd was murdered, a couple of days later, I'm just like thinking about it's in the news, it's all everywhere. And I texted her and I was just like, hey, I just wanted to reach out and see how you're doing. Like, are you okay? And I didn't specifically tie it to the George Floyd thing, but she responded, and this is all in our first episode, why we started the podcast. And she was like, "Oh yeah, the kids are good, blah blah blah." Like she just started talking about family stuff. And I was like, "Oh, okay, that's great." And I didn't follow up and say what I really meant. But because we have a close relationship, a few hours later she texts me back and she goes, "Did you actually mean how was I doing in the wake of what happened with George Floyd?" And I was like, "Yes, that's what I was asking." And she's like, "Thank you for asking." And then she went into it and it was like, I was afraid, and I've had to unpack what was holding me back. Like, I wanted to say, like, are you traumatized right now? Like, how are you coping? What is this bringing up for you? But I almost felt like
Do you even want to talk about it?
I didn't
Just,
know how
yeah,
to.
yeah.
So,
Mhm.
you got to learn, and you got to be willing to be wrong and say the wrong things and like work on yourself.
Right, right. It's while difficult, really important.
Yeah.
And I think that's a way to really forge leadership with people who report to you. If you're a revenue leader and you're looking to have a diverse team, if you have a diverse team, lean into it, right? Have that
Yeah.
conversation. But I look, I don't know how you can have that conversation practically in today's climate without it takes a level of trust.
It
It
does.
level does, because it could be misconstrued and you could say the wrong thing and it just
Performative, this and that.
right, it
Yeah.
just gets down the slippery slope and you never make it back. And I can understand why people avoid it. Um, but then you see women in sales, Black women in sales, you see these groups that are forging and coming up. And so maybe it's not within the organization. Maybe it's, part of that is an individual stepping out and participating in some of these groups to get more insight,
Like
talk
affinity
to,
resource groups, I think, are really great.
okay.
Yeah, and I think that there's a level of the people who are willing to do the emotional labor,
Mm,
who can teach us, seek out those resources. Like that's one of the things that I've done
mm,
is like my Instagram feed, and like I follow so many activists because I want to learn from them. If I don't know, learn from the people who are willing to share their knowledge, and I read books all the time and I watch documentary. I'm attempting to educate myself so that I can be a better ally, and I can be a supportive leader. And
and so you can
I
deal with the
don't
issues you're facing in your own realm
yes.
and forging as a leader,
And I know they're
if
not the
you,
same. I know
right,
the
right,
things I face are
right,
different than what, Essence faces as a Black woman.
right.
She's not just, a woman. She also faces the issues of being a person of color. And so I understand we're different, but I feel so aligned because I know what it's like to be other. Like I know what that feels like.
Mm.
I know what it feels like to walk around and not feel safe. I know what it feels like to be watched. It's not the same as what she goes through, but I know as a woman what that feels like. And I can only imagine what that's like for other people in other categories. And so I just view myself as someone who, for whatever platform I have, I want to be a voice for good, and to break down the barriers, and a lot, like I come from a very different background than where I am. And so I know all the arguments, I know all the sort of tropes, and I want to be part of tearing those down, because at the end of the day we are just people. Like we're just people. I've lived overseas, and I've traveled a lot, and what I've learned is that everywhere you go, people kind of want the same things.
Right,
We're really far more similar than we think.
right. This is why people want to work for you. This is why you've you create such a phenomenal culture within
Oh,
your
thank you.
teams.
You're
This is
sweet.
why the alignment works. You build relationships well with, people of other departments, not just other, cultures, right? So
I get
I
really
think
like fired up about
no,
it
but
too.
this is at the essence of who, talking about your essence
Yeah.
of
Mhm.
who you are. And look, if someone's listening to this and they're thinking about joining an organization that you're running or working with you at the startup marketer, I think this is the difference maker in some cases, right? When you
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
viewpoint, you stand for something, you believe in something, and you're willing to voice that, and on a platform, in a context that these issues can be uncomfortable for. But if you can crack this code the way that
Yeah.
you have, and it sounds like it comes from within who you are first. It starts with you, like you said, right? If a revenue leader out there who's trying to do better at this, start with yourself, and
Yeah.
you will end up, leading a phenomenal organization, just like Becky.
Thank
Um,
you.
well,
Appreciate that.
I know we've ran along, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah,
Thank
of
you
course.
for all your insights. And where should people go to find you and learn more about you?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, Startup Marketer. So that's start-up marketer.com. I'm on all the social channels, the same name. Yeah, and
Perfect.
I've got blog posts and some resources on there. And if you're looking for a growth tech marketer, I'm your gal.